Senator Coons, thank you so much for being with us and being a part of our week-long series on faith and politics. It's great to chat with you today.
Thank you.
I know
I
you're
have literally just come from a very upsetting Judiciary Committee where all the Democrats walked out after Chairman Grassley refused to let us finish speaking about Emil Bove, who is a nominee for the Third Circuit. The White House also genuinely surprised me by last night nominating someone I had not even had the chance to meet with or review for the Delaware Third Circuit seat. So I'm angry about all that, and I have to get up and leave in 15 minutes for another hearing. So I'm sorry if it's going to be a little brief.
No worries.
But I was just explaining that by way of context.
No worries. And I feel like the drama that's happening on Capitol Hill, sometimes, unless you're watching C-SPAN or something like that, you might not even have insight into any of this happening. So thank you for that context. Senator Coons is a senator from the great state of Delaware. And I believe it is your first time, maybe even only your second time on the program this morning. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great being on with you.
So we've been talking all week long about faith and politics, and I know this is a topic that you are so passionate about, and so this is why I wanted to include you in this week-long series, because we just went through a budget fight where the big ugly bill, now law, passed, and there are going to be real consequences for so many vulnerable communities in the country. As a person of faith, what do you want our listeners at home to know about the damage of this particular law and how it flies in the face of so many faith teachings about how we should take care of people who are vulnerable and hurting?
Well, first, there are lots of us in the Democratic caucus in the Senate who first felt called to public service, to help others, to try and strengthen our country, to address the issues of health equity, of hunger, of lack of access to clean air and water, to safe housing, through a concern for each other that's rooted in seeing other Americans of different backgrounds and different states and different needs as children of God, as people fully deserving of the respect and the investment and the support that entails. This bill, this law now, as you pointed out, is going to do massive damage. I recently did an event at the Delaware Food Bank with my colleagues, Senator Lisa Blunt Rochester and Congresswoman Sarah McBride, where we went through in detail the tens of thousands of children, seniors, and families who will be hungry as a result of the cuts to the hunger programs of the federal government, and the millions of people across the country who will lose access to health care and crowd into emergency rooms sicker, with less support, more likely to go bankrupt in ways that will increase their suffering and reduce the health of our country as a whole. The bottom line is that this act, which really was centrally driven by trying to deliver bigger tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, is also going to make us hungrier, sicker, and more divided.
I feel like religion in this particular moment, and we've been talking to faith leaders and people of faith from all different walks of life and people who believe in different things all week long. And one of the things that, I always come back to is we need to care about other human beings. And in this moment, I feel like there are certain aspects of the faith community, mostly on the right end of the political spectrum, that weaponize their faith to harm as opposed to utilize their faith to help. How do we get here, and how do we get back to a place where it doesn't really matter what you believe as long as you are leading your day from the principle of do no harm and to help your fellow human?
Well, for a long time in American history, the faith community, broadly understood, was really at the center of social justice movements, whether it was the civil rights movement or the labor movement or the environmental movement. And that was motivated by a broadly shared compassion and concern for each other. If you think about the images of who was marching across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, it included priests and nuns, rabbis and Protestant clergy, folks of a wide range of backgrounds. And just 2 weeks before the final vote on the big, beautiful bill, which was anything but beautiful, it was a big, ugly bill, Reverend Jim Wallace and I helped convene literally hundreds of clergy, religious, civic leaders from around the country in a protest on the steps of the Capitol, which began by their reading dozens of scripture passages from Torah, from the Gospels, from other faith traditions that all put a privilege, a focus, a centrality on caring for the poor, on caring for the needy, for the widow, for the orphan, for the outcast, and then put in sharp contrast how this law does the opposite. This really started in the 80s when the evangelical movement became much more politically active, became sort of the ground troops for the Reagan Revolution. And over the arc of my life, Democrats have become more and more uncomfortable with speaking publicly about their faith, and a broader range of middle Americans associate faith and public statements of faith with conservatives, with folks who really focus on a few social issues and do not have this traditional broader focus on labor rights or the environment or on healthcare or on hunger. And so I think one of our challenges as a party, as Democrats, is to encourage those of us who are motivated to serve by our faith to be more comfortable and to be more confident, to speak in a way that is not exclusive or insulting, to respect the very broad range of traditions in our country, but to be willing to step forward and say, this is why I serve, and this is why this particular bill is wrong. Yesterday, I gave a speech on the Senate floor where I began by referencing the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept, and spoke out against the cruel cuts to foreign aid, to disaster assistance, to literally feeding hungry children and fighting pandemics around the world. We were here literally all night last night. I'm trying to stop further cuts to programs overseas that are similar to these deep cuts you were just talking about here at home.
You mentioned that more Democrats need to talk about their faith. Why is it that so many Democrats seem uncomfortable or unwilling to lean into their beliefs and to talk about it more openly?
You know, I'm not completely sure because I grew up in a community and a family where faith was just a sort of central accepted part of our lives. But when I went to college, and in particular when I went to law school, it was something that was just not talked about and was considered, embarrassing or awkward or not cool or not left or not smart. And I still recall that when I told my law school friends and classmates that I was going to take a degree at the divinity school, many of them responded in really judgmental and unkind ways. I wasn't asking for their approval. I was just telling them that I was taking classes in pastoral care and in community service and in scriptural studies. And it was striking how uncomfortable that made many of my progressive friends in law school. So I don't really know what's the origin of it, other than, look, we have to recognize that organized religion has harmed many people in the United States. There are certainly folks who have become distanced from their faith traditions because of their own experiences. Someone I was quite close to and remain close to today in law school confided in me that his initial very negative reaction was frankly because of something horrible that had happened in his parish when he was a child that had driven him away from the Catholic Church. He wasn't judging me. He was just reflecting an unpleasant experience. And the more that folks associate public religiosity with aggressive campaigns by Christian nationalists, or exclusive focusing on reproductive freedom issues or death penalty issues, the more they think it's a narrow concern, not something that speaks to broader concerns, whether it's about healthcare, the environment, our communities, or economic justice.
You mentioned Christian nationalism, and we talked earlier in the week with an expert on white Christian nationalism. Does your faith inform the way you talk about the rise in authoritarianism or white Christian nationalism in the country right now? Because I feel like there is a space where we can talk about aligning ourselves with values that are, that have a moral grounding that are not what the folks on the other end of the political spectrum are talking about in a moment like this one?
There are passages in the Gospels and the Torah that I think speak clearly to a sense of who is my neighbor, who are we connected to. In Christ, there is no East or West, nor Greek nor Jew, for example. And I have always felt that the calling of the United States to be engaged with the rest of the world, to be supportive of development and addressing disasters and crises in the rest of the world, is rooted in that teaching that we are all children of God, regardless of race, religion, background, ethnicity, faith, language. And here at home, similarly, Christian nationalism presumes that we are a country that is uniquely endowed with an historic mission. And at times that has, in my experience on the Foreign Relations Committee here, that hurts our partnerships around the world, our alliances around the world, but it also fails to reflect a real embrace of the full creation of the world and the full range of humanity, both here in the United States and around the world.
One of the other things you alluded to, which I think is a very important topic that perhaps more Democrats need to talk about in the context of their faith and their beliefs, is the planet. And one of the things that we had a conversation in depth about a few years back was why more Christians and why more people of faith are not talking about the climate crisis in the context of their faith and their belief that God created everything that we see, and we need to protect that.
It is, I think, critical that we anchor a message about preserving the world and stopping the harm that we're doing to the world, to anchor that in creation, and in a sense that we are stewards but not masters of creation around us, and that we have an obligation to those who will succeed us, who will live here following us, to not destroy the very planet that we've inherited. So I've had a number, I co-chair a bipartisan climate solutions caucus, and we've actually had two different faith roundtables where we've had folks from evangelical, Catholic, Jewish, other traditions sit with a group of senators and share with us about how a creation care movement is picking up steam throughout the religious communities of our nation. I do think it helps us to sort of open the hearts of people who otherwise really just see climate change through a partisan political lens, or really only see it as an attack on oil and gas. And if they're from a part of the country, a state where that's the major employer, or if they've long been aligned with fossil fuels, they perceive this as an attack on them. By broadening the aperture of our engagement and looking at the challenge of climate change through the lens of creation, I think we can have a broader and deeper conversation.
We only have 2 more minutes, and I know you have to go quickly back to the Senate floor, but can you talk a bit about how your faith is keeping you hopeful?
Well, this is a hard day to ask me that question.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We were literally up all night, but I spoke yesterday morning at the bipartisan weekly prayer breakfast. It's a very small group of just senators, and I was very vulnerable with that group of, about 20 senators, both about how my faith gives me hope, gives me a confidence, a sense that in the end, all of this, everything we do here, everything that happens, is under God's sovereignty. And it is hard for me at times to put down the tools of fighting with each other over our divides and our different priorities. And it was particularly hard because of the vote that I knew was coming later. But honestly, without my faith, I don't know that I would have hope. This is a very difficult and divided time for our nation. We have come through harder times than this. We have found our way forward to make this a more perfect union, to see each other more graciously, and to be more kind and more just with each other, in no small part because of the role that faith has played all the way back to the Revolution. So I'm doing a fair amount of reading things about the civil rights movement, about the labor rights movement, and about the connection folks made at that time between faith, service, and change to try and remain hopeful in what can be a very difficult time and place.
Senator Chris Coons, Democratic Senator from the great state of Delaware, thank you so much for being with us on what I know is a busy day to talk about your faith and be a part of our Faith and Politics series. It was great having you on this morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Great being with you.